And of course, oh, we've got somebody pop it in here at the last minute, but that's okay. So of course, tonight we are really excited. Oop. Hi, I've got somebody.
Where you were. I wanted to give you a haircut at 6:30.
Okay, I'm gonna.
That could be me.
Yeah. Oh, I got it. The plague hair is great. Well, so anyways, tonight is the first Bloody Thursday of the 2020-2021 season. And we're really happy that you're all here with us. Of course, we're very excited to welcome Robert Dugoni. Bob has been with us before several times. He's a much beloved Northwest writer, big favorite of us at Friends of Mystery. And so we're always excited when we have the opportunity to bring him with us tonight. He is going to be interviewed by Kelly Garrett, who is also one of our members who works with me. I'm Bill Cameron, for those of you who don't know me. She and I handle the programming for Friends of Mystery, and she is also a mystery writer in her own right. She's the author of the upcoming Ground Rules mystery series, which is set in hipster Portland, with the first novel scheduled to come out in April of next year. And she's an author. She's also the author of the Oregon Book Award finalist, a YA thriller, Last to Die, great book. Which I really loved myself. And she's also the recipient of a 2020 Oregon Literary Fellowship. So she's going to be talking to the winner of the 2020 Spotted Owl Award for The Eighth Sister, Bob Dugoni. Now, of course, you all came here to see him, so I'm just going to be really, really quick here. Obviously, he is the many times best-selling author of all kinds of books. The Eighth Sister, of course, is the one that he's being fated for here tonight. But you've got a brand new one that I think we're going to be talking about here in a few minutes. And, he's been a Spotted Owl winner before, and multi-award winner, multi-bestseller, writing instructor extraordinaire, and all-around delightful fellow. So I'm going to pass it off to Kelly, who will then give Bob the business. So thank you everyone for coming, and welcome Bob Dugoni.
Thank you.
Well, Bob, congratulations on not only winning the Spotted Owl, but you had a novel come out at The Last Agent 2 days ago. Can you tell us about it?
I did. It's been a hectic month. I should show you my calendar. September was pretty full. The Last Agent is actually the sequel to The Eighth Sister. And it brings back Charles Jenkins, a 62-year-old former CIA officer who, in The Eighth Sister, finds himself brought back into the fold and sent to Russia under false pretenses, and is essentially running for his life, only to get home and to be tried for espionage. In The Last Agent, it opens with Jenkins back home. He's got a wife and 2 kids, including a newborn daughter. And a young man shows up at the farm and says he works with the CIA and he'd like to talk to him about Moscow. And Jenkins nearly kills the guy, but eventually they talk. And what Jenkins learns is that a character from The Eighth Sister, who is near and dear to his heart, may still be alive in Moscow and being held in Moscow's Lefortovo prison, which is its notorious prison in Moscow, where they send dissidents and people who just tend to disappear and are never heard from again. Being a guy of high ethics and high morals, he cannot stand by and allow this person to be held, and he goes back in to see if she is really there and if he can get her out. So the book came out Tuesday. It's been doing extremely well. One of the fun parts about espionage novels is they're chase books. And I get to talk to my friends who fly bush planes and are professional scuba divers and snowmobilers and you name it. and I get to use them and just put Jenkins in all kinds of unusual situations, and then try to figure out a way to get them out. So The Last Agent is really it's a book that starts running on page 1 and it doesn't stop running until page 400.
What was your journey like from being an aspiring writer to a published author?
Long. Like all of us, it takes a long time. It just takes a long time to establish a footing, to get people to treat you seriously, to treat your novel seriously, to understand that this is something that you want to do as a profession. It's not a hobby. It's not a fly-by-night, one book you want to write just so the grandkids have something to read. It just takes a long time. I remember a lot of people telling me that, a lot of established writers, when I was, starting out and struggling, and that was their advice to me. And they were completely accurate. It took me about 10 years from when I went back to writing again. I was a lawyer. I wrote growing up. I wrote for the LA Times. I wrote in high school on the newspaper. It's what I wanted to do. And then I chickened out and decided I better get a job that has a salary. So I became a lawyer, and I practiced law. And until one day I finally said, this isn't what I had planned for my life, and I was going to start writing again. And that was about 1994. And my first book published was in 2004, and that was The Cyanide Canary, which is a true story, a nonfiction book. And in between, there were many, many, many rejection letters, because I started in the day when you actually sent letters. You didn't send email, and that's how old I am. And you would send it off, and you'd have about a 3 or 4 day reprieve before you got the letter back. It said no thanks, and then you checked it off your list, and you waited for the next one, and the next one, and the next one, and the next one. And really, I tell people all the time that I think the writing profession is a profession that takes a lot of luck. You need to be in the right place at the right time, and I'll talk about that in a second. But you also need to be prepared when you get that opportunity. If you're not prepared, that opportunity will pass you by, and you just don't know when you're going to get another one. So when I had a gentleman knock on my door, basically, and say, "I think I have a great story. It's the story of a young man who was poisoned up in Idaho." I had the opportunity, and I jumped on it. And The Cyanide Canary really has got my foot in the door. It got agents to treat me seriously. It got editors to treat me seriously, and that was the book that sort of launched my career. The first novel then got picked up, right away. It's a novel that had been rejected multiple times over the years. But I say that, and I'll caution that by saying I had gone back and really studied the craft of writing when I was getting all my rejection letters. I went back and I really studied Saul Stein on writing, Lawrence Block writing, Donald Moss, Christopher Vogler, The Writer's Journey. I mean, I have two big long shelves full of novels on the craft that I really truly studied and underlined and basically gave myself an MFA, so that when I did get my opportunity, I had reworked the novels that had been getting rejected, because I finally understood why they were getting rejected. And I was fortunate that those novels got picked up. Critically, they did really well. Sales-wise, they did not do really well. A couple of them hit the New York Times list, but that was the product of pre-sales and all those things. And the short of a long story is, by the time I wrote my 5th David Sloan novel, I pretty much said to my agent, Simon & Schuster's not going to re-sign me. And they not only didn't re-sign me, they didn't even put the book out in paperback, which for a mystery writer like all of us, that's pretty much the kiss of death. And it was. And it turned out to be the best thing that ever happened to me. You know, as disappointing as it was, and as anxiety provoking as it was, being a husband and a father of two kids that were still in private school and all those things, it brought me to write a new series with a female homicide detective named Tracy Crosswhite. It brought me to Amazon Publishing because nobody in New York wanted my books because they looked at the numbers and said, this guy writes well, but he doesn't sell. So they weren't going to give me another break. And, you know, I'm not self-published. That's sort of a misnomer that people have. I am published by, my mysteries are published by Thomas and Mercer. My literary novels are published by Lake Union. And I have developmental editors that rip me up to shreds, like all of you, I'm sure. I have copy editors, I have publicity people, I have all those people. But what I have is I have a team that believes in me and believed in me from the beginning. And that was my second opportunity. And that was my luck. I was in the right place at the right time. And, you know, I knock on wood that things have gone extremely well since then.
You mentioned your law background. How do you decide like how much like legal information to insert in the novels in your? Sorry, I asked that really poorly.
No, that's okay. I know what you're getting at, and the answer is as little as possible. You know, I was a lawyer for 13 years, and I can tell you that 99% of my civil litigation cases and trials were boring. You know, there are a few stories over 13 years that I could tell you that you go, oh, that's interesting. So when you're writing legal scenes, it's really important to not only make them understandable to the average person, but to make them interesting and to find ways to make them interesting. You know, a lot of people make the mistake of trying to make it realistic, you know, state your name, where do you live, how long have you lived there? And you know, the same rules apply to legal thrillers as apply to all the other scenes and all the mystery books that we all write, which is don't write the parts that people don't read. You know, start at a high point of tension and end at a high point of tension. So, you know, what I learned was after getting through the preliminaries, he asked, bam, and we're right, you know, you're right in it. And it's really that interaction. It's the examinations and the cross-examinations that I think people are interested in. I mean, if you watch the shows on television, my wife during this whole COVID crisis has gotten into the series Suits, you know, and she's got 9 seasons that she can watch. Well, if you watch that show, you know, the times that they are in trial or they're out of mediation, it's, you know, it's the high points of tension. It's not the mundane, boring things that tend to be, you know, most of your cases. I can remember we would get, you know, a bombshell in a case. Well, the other side has to get it too. They get it in discovery. And so you're holding this bombshell, but they're prepared for it. So, you know, you go to a mediation or a trial and it's not like Perry Mason. It's not like you're going to surprise anybody, and they're prepared for it. They have an answer for it. And so, you know, it can be pretty mundane. I talked to Phil Margolin, who's a buddy of mine, one time, who was a defense lawyer who represented people who were on trial to be put to death. And he never had a single person convicted or sent to death. They were convicted, but they weren't put to death. He won every single time. And he told me, he said, he knew when he really knew his case because he would start to fall asleep in the courtroom. Now think about that. You know, that's how mundane it was. Because you know, they put some expert on the stand, and he knew the case so well, and he knew what he was going to. That he'd actually start to fall asleep. So I think it's important that that in things not only in trial scenes, but in other things that involve an expertise, you know, like scuba diving or flying a bush plane, that you put in just enough that the character needs in order to accomplish what the character wants. And you don't put in more than that because you're trying to impress somebody.
So speaking of things like scuba diving, what's the weirdest thing you've done for research?
I think probably the thing that almost got me in the most trouble was, so again, going back in time, I went into the brand new Seattle Public Library because I needed to do some research on the Jury Master, the first novel I wrote. And some of the Jury Master takes place in the White House. And so I needed to understand a floor plan of the White House, or something, so I could understand my characters, what they would do or whatever. But I also had some other questions. So I went up to a research librarian, and I said to the research librarian, hey, I need some help finding some information. And I didn't bother to tell the guy that I was a novelist. And I said, so the first thing I need is, I need to understand a way that you could kill somebody using dry ice. Because I understand that dry ice will literally suck the oxygen out of a room. And the guy's kind of looking at me, and he said, well, let me see if we have anything in the system on that. And as he's typing, I said, oh, and the other thing I need is a floor plan of the White House. and he kind of gives me one of these side glances, and he stops typing. He goes, I think you better tell me what you need this research for. Oh, I'm sorry, I'm writing a novel. And he goes, okay, I was hoping that was what you needed.
What's the hardest part of writing a book for you?
I think it's probably just getting to the end of that first draft. And I say that with some hesitation because, like all of you, I love what I do. I mean, I love this. I love to, it's why I put out as many books as I think I put out now. It's because I love stories, and I love telling them, and I love being surprised by them and where they go. So, but I'm not an outliner. I'm more of an organic writer. And what that really means is that that first draft is really my outline, and what I tell myself and what I practice is, nobody reads that first draft but me. No one. I mean, not my wife, not my research helpers. Nobody reads that first draft, and what that does is it frees me to put in whatever I want. The weird, the gory, the bloody, the guts, the explicit sex scenes. I mean, whatever I want, I throw it in there, because what I've come to realize by doing this 20 novels now is a lot of times our subconscious will tell us, what needs to go into a novel. And if you don't trust that, you find that you're cutting or you're editing things that you later realize, oh my God, now I know why that I was doing that. Many years ago, when I was struggling, I read Stephen King's book on writing, and one of the things that Stephen King said in his book that really touched me was, he said, writers communicate through telepathy. And what he meant by that is, he said, a writer sits down at his or her desk in a place, and he writes words on a page that are going to be read by someone he's never met and never will, in a city that he's never traveled to and never will. And yet those words will bring that person to tears, will make that person laugh, will make that person shout out in scared because they're scared. It moves them somehow. And he's, how does that work? He says it's telepathy. And then years later, I was on a panel at the Surrey Writers Conference with Diana Gabaldon. And somebody in the audience raised their hand and they said, Diana, can you talk about the magic? And it was obvious that this was a question she'd gotten before, because she never even paused. And she just said, sure. And she said, I write at nighttime, and my husband and I will go out to dinner. And when we come back, he goes into his room and he watches TV or he reads a book. And I go into my office and I close the door and I light a candle and I wait until my characters start to talk to me. And when my characters start to talk to me, that's the magic. And I'll be honest with you, when I first heard that, I thought it was the biggest bunch of hooey I had ever heard in my life. And then especially when I wrote The Extraordinary Life of Sam Hell, I knew exactly what she was talking about. I would wake up in the middle of the night with scenes running through my head. And I'd have to come into my office and turn on my computer, and the information was coming so quickly that I'd be typing one scene and I'd be typing notes on my second screen about what comes next and what comes next and what comes next. And I don't know where it was all coming from, but I had reached a point, I think, in my career where I trusted it. And I trusted I trusted that I was just to transcribe what was being told to me. And I think some of the more recent success I've had has been in large part because of that trust and allowing my characters to be free to do the things they need to do in order to accomplish the things that they're going to accomplish in the book. And so I do a tremendous amount of research before I start writing. I read, I have a new literary novel coming out next September. And so I probably read 15 firsthand accounts of men who served in Vietnam. And I probably read another 10 accounts of other things. And I watched probably 15 documentaries. And so by the time I sit down to write, I do know where my story is going to go, and I understand it. And I have a good idea of the characters because I pull the characters out of the research that I do. But then I let them tell me the story. I let the story unfold. And that's pretty scary, as you all know. I mean, it's a pretty scary thing to do. But if no one's going to read that first draft, then you're good.
So you mentioned the research you did, for example, for like a character during the Vietnam War, and you've also, I know you have a female protagonist. What kind of research or feedback did you get when like writing her, especially compared to your male characters?
Yeah, I mean, what I always tell people is I don't write from the perspective of a woman, and I don't write from the perspective of an African-American man in The Eighth Sister. I write from the perspective of a human being. With respect to Tracy Crosswhite, I write from the perspective of a person who has had who has a big skeleton in her closet, who's been injured, internally, and is fighting to get her life back. And she's trying to do a job the best she can. And she's got a male chauvinist pig for a boss. And she's running into it, but she's doing the best she can. And I think that transcends gender, and I think it transcends race. So I've never gotten anybody who said to me, you can't write from the perspective of a woman, or you can't write from the perspective of an African-American because you're not Black. I've never had anybody say that to me. And if anything, I get the opposite, is how do you do it? And I think the answer is, I don't try to do it. I don't think of Tracy any different than I think of Kins or Dell or Faz in those books. She's a homicide detective trying to do her job to the best of her abilities. And I think sometimes the mistakes we make as writers is we do try to write from a perspective. And I think that can get us in trouble.
Do you know the George R.R. Martin quote? Like, someone asked him, like, how do you write such compelling female characters? And his answer was, I start from the perspective that women are people.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I think when you boil it all down, there's not that much difference between men and women. I mean, we want the same thing, right? We want to be respected in our job. We want to be respected by our spouse. We want to raise our children as best we can. You're going to run into complications that are going to differ, like, the sexual harassment and things like that. But I had a sister that worked in a job that, she was sexually harassed by a guy that didn't even know he was sexually harassing her. One of those old guys that would just, pat her on the back and stuff and things. And she finally had to go to her supervisor to tell that he needed to stop, he needed to back off. You know, those are things though that I can pull from experiences of people that I've lived with and who are around me. But at our core, I think our core, you know, we want the same things, which is to be respected in what we do and to be treated fairly and honestly and with respect.
So over your career, which was your hardest book to write? Or hardest for you?
You know, definitely The Jury Master, because I didn't know what I was doing. I estimated one time that I probably threw out about 1,200 pages of that in that novel, and I'm not exaggerating, because I was still practicing law. So you know, my caseload would lighten up, and I would start to write, and I'd just sit down and start to write, and I'd be off on this weird long tangent that had nothing to do with the story. And so it wasn't until I really sat down, you know, several years later and studied story structure and studied, you know, Chris Vogler and the hero's journey and the writer's journey, and really started to understand how a story is supposed to be told, that I could focus my writing. So that book probably went through 19 drafts, and like I said, just hundreds, if not thousands of pages. I mean, 1,000 pages, you know, which are gone. I don't even know where they are anymore. But you know, that's the caution I always tell people is, you know, you wouldn't want to go to a surgeon that hadn't studied how to be a surgeon, right? So it's important that we understand what it is that we're trying to do as novelists.
Do you hide any Easter eggs in your books for readers to find? Not that I do it. I don't do it consciously. I will have readers email me and say, "Oh, well, I saw this was great," and da, 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 da. And sometimes I'll recognize that, you know, I did it, and sometimes I won't even recognize that I did it. It'll be their perspective, which is the beauty of writing, is that every reader is a different perspective. Every reader comes at a book from a different place and a different look. And you know, some people they have amazing experiences with your novel, and that's magical. And you know, the opposite is also true. You'll have people that they don't make that connection. It doesn't fit with them, and it's not right with them, but that's okay. What's been the most surprising thing, or surprising part of your writing journey so far?
I think it's that I've found success, honestly. You know, I didn't come into this thinking I was going to be a best-selling author. I came into this thinking I didn't want to practice law anymore. I wasn't happy doing what I was doing, and I just wanted to do what I was happy doing. And I knew that since the 7th grade, I knew I wanted to be a writer. So I just thought, you know what, I'm going to take a shot at it. I'm going to do it. And I thought, you know, I may have to do some other things part-time and to make, you know, ends meet and all that. And I'm more surprised than anyone that I found success. And you know, I'll give you just sort of a real quick, brief story that would sum it up. I up until probably 6-7 years ago, I was driving a car that had about 150,000 miles on it and was, you know, pretty beat up. And we decided that we would go buy a used car and give the other car to my daughter to just drive to high school and back. And when I got to the dealership, you know, I knew the guy that owned the dealership. He's a friend of mine. And I went in and we started talking about what I wanted to do. And he looked at me and he said, "No offense, but why don't you just buy yourself a new car and give your old car to your daughter? Why are you buying a used car?" And I said, "Well, I don't know. I haven't really thought about it." Because I didn't, you know, It didn't dawn on me that, yeah, you know what, I probably could get a new car. Now, I'm not talking a BMW or a Mercedes. I bought a Subaru, right? I live in the Pacific Northwest, and the Subaru is a perfect car. It's a great car. So I bought a Subaru. But I'm a guy that just never had or wanted things. I learned when my dad passed away that you don't take anything with you. And so I've never owned a stereo. Now I don't have to. My kids bought me a big screen TV for Christmas one year because I was still watching TV, you know, on a regular TV. I'm just not into stuff. And so I think the fact that I found success as a writer, you know, is really the most surprising thing for me.
I know as a writer, most writers read a lot. Who are some of your favorite authors to read? And what do you think is like maybe an underappreciated novel that everyone here should pick up?
So I read everyone. I mean, I read everyone. And I read all genres. I've read The Boston Girl, you know, which was chick lit. I've read sci-fi. I've read westerns. I've read romance. I've read mysteries, obviously. I've read thrillers. I read everyone. And now I get asked so often if I will blurb people's books that honestly, in the last 3 years, I don't know that I've picked up a book that, like I said, I want to read this book. I've been asked to read books and some of them have been very good. So, I mean, that's been a pleasant surprise, but it's been really hard for me to find, to have the time to just find a book like, you know, I don't know, what's a big book that's out now, you know, Where the Crawdads Sing or something like that. You know, say, okay, I want to read that. But as far as underappreciated books, I think that if you're a writer, I would say The Green Mile, because I have never read a book that was so informational and instructional as The Green Mile. And I think that was because Stephen King had to write it in sections. And so he had to be really good about how he structured that book. But beyond the structure, if you read that book and you know, what I'd say is what happened for me was I would read a paragraph and then I would suddenly stop and realize that in that one paragraph, Stephen King had used every one of his senses. The character, Paul Edgecombe, had used every sense, his sense of sight, hearing, smell, taste, touch, in one paragraph. And it set the scene, you know, it was like watching a play on a stage. And I read that book before I ever saw the movie. And it was really as a writer, it was really a magical experience for me. And I keep that book. I read that book whenever I'm writing a new novel. I read that book because it reminds me of what I'm trying to do, the characters I'm trying to create, how empathetic I'm trying to make them, all those things. But really what it tells me, because I'm not very good at it instinctively, is, okay, I got to go back and fix this scene. I got to put some smells in this restaurant, you know, that kind of thing. For people who aren't writers or just anybody, there was a book that came out, I think it was several years ago, and it was, I pulled it up and I listened to it as I was driving to and from work. And it was, you all may know it, but I had never heard of it. It was called Mr. Penumbra's 24-Hour Bookstore by Robin. I'm trying to remember the name. I wrote it down. Robin, it's not, I want to say Bloom, but that's not right. But it was called Mr. Penumbra's 24-Hour Bookstore. And I kind of went into it with absolutely no expectations. And I really found it sort of enchanting. And you know, I had never heard of it, and I don't know how it's done. I don't know if it was a blockbuster bestseller or not, but for me, it was really a pleasant surprise.
So I heard a rumor you might have some exciting Hollywood news.
Yeah. So we sold The Last Agent and The Eighth Sister to Roadside Productions, which did Manchester by the Sea and some other pretty big movies. The head of the studio, who I had a chance to speak with, has a really wonderful vision for a television series. And so it was a really long process, because right in the middle of the process, COVID hit. And of course, everything got shut down in LA. Nothing was being made. And you all know that just if you turn your televisions on, there's nothing new out there right now. And that's because everything got shut down. But we did complete the contract just recently. and it's done. And the last agent came out and is doing extremely well. So I think that's got to please them. And, you all know how this goes. You kind of, you see what happens. I don't have really any control over any of the stuff. I'm an executive producer, but I think that's more to be a consultant. I will say that they asked me if I would be interested in writing the screenplay, and I said absolutely no, because people go to school for years to learn how to write screenplays. And what I said to them was, I would love it if you found an African American to write the screenplay, male or female, because I think they could bring a perspective to it that I'm sure I can't. And it'd be wonderful if that person was an A-list screenwriter and had all kinds of credits to their name, because then it would be more likely to get picked up. So we'll see what happens. Fingers crossed.
I'd like to open it up to questions from the audience.
Okay.
Any, Bill, in?
Sorry, I forgot I muted myself. My apologies. So I've got one question so far from the audience, from Ellen, who asked, how do you connect with the Amazon publishing houses at Thomas and Mercer and Lake Union?
So for me, what happened was they had been reaching out to my agent, Meg Ruley, for probably a year or two, saying, how's Bob Dugoni doing? Is he happy? He's a Seattle guy. We're in Seattle. We'd love to have a chance to talk to him. And then finally, when it all kind of came down, she said, why don't you go have lunch with them? And I did. So Thomas and Mercer, you get in contact with them sort of the same way as any other publishing house that's out there. They have an online presence. They have editors. For all of you, if you're writing mysteries, you want an editor at Thomas and Mercer, because that's the mystery imprint at that house. And they don't do a lot of conferences. They don't do a lot of pitch fests kind of things, and I think it's because they've gotten very popular. But if you go online on Amazon Publishing and go under Thomas and Mercer, I think you'll find the email addresses that you need for the editors at Thomas and Mercer. I mean, I can tell you my editor is the head of Thomas and Mercer, and that's Gracie Doyle. And she's just a lovely, lovely lady, and very, very sharp. Very sharp.
Nice. So Jay wonders if you could talk a little bit about marketing in the age of COVID, which is probably relevant since you just had a big book launch.
Yeah. What I've tried to do is I've tried to be relevant with the independent publishers, because I know that they're struggling. And so the really savvy bookstores, not publishers, the really savvy bookstores sort of jumped on this quickly. Barbara Peters at Poison Pen in Scottsdale, for instance, she has already two huge screens up in her store, and she does Zoom. Instead of bringing the author into the store, she does Zoom. And I did a Zoom presentation the other day, and there's probably 150 people on the Zoom call. It's hard, it's difficult, because you can't make those personal connections. You certainly, can't, sell a book over Zoom. But what we did with Barbara, and what I did with the bookstore here in Kirkland, which is Booktree, is I signed books for her, and they were shipped. My publisher then shipped them, the signed copies, to her. And I went down to Booktree and I signed books for him. And then when we did the Zoom presentation, he could say to them, I have signed copies if you'd like a signed copy. I have signed copies, and we'll mail them. Or if you want to drive by the bookstore, we have curbside service.
Mhm.
So there was all those things. But it's a strange new world. The positive is that more people are reading more books than probably ever before. Um, my sales have increased over this whole process, and I think that's the product of what I was talking about earlier, where there's not a lot being made in LA. And I mean, you go look on what's on television, and it's mostly reruns. So even after a full day of writing, I'll find myself sitting down and picking up a book, and I think a lot of people are doing the same. The interesting question that I've gotten is, are you going to put COVID in your future novels? And that's a tough question.
Yeah.
I have not done it. I don't. It's not in The Last Agent. It's not in Her Tracks, the eighth Tracy Crossite novel coming out next April, and it's not in my literary novel coming out next September. And it's not that I did that deliberately or didn't do it. I just had started all those books sort of before this whole thing hit. But I will tell you that I've had a lot of people email me after reading my books and said, "Thank you for the escape."
Mm-hmm.
Which I think is interesting. And I think a lot of people feel like, you turn on the news and it's COVID, 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 COVID. You look at the newspaper and it's COVID, 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 COVID. And a lot of people, I think, are looking to escape,
Yeah.
get away from it if they can.
Yeah. Well, so does anybody else have any questions? You can type them in the chat, or actually at this point, I think you could feel free to unmute yourself. I don't believe that I have eliminated your ability to unmute, although who knows? Like I said, I'm an amateur. But yeah, jump right in.
Well, Bob, when
Okay.
writing series, how have you kept your series fresh? Like, did you plan kind of from the beginning, like areas that you could go,
No.
or is it just chance? Or
Well, I take that back. So I never thought Charles Jenkins was going to be a series. The whole story kind of came about in a weird way, where I had an individual who wanted to get in touch with me, and I kind of resisted that. And then finally, when I got in touch with him, I found out that he had been an intelligence officer who was tried for espionage and acquitted. And so we had a chance to talk, and that's why I ended up writing The Eighth Sister. It's not his story, but it inspired me to sort of write about Charles Jenkins and David Sloan again. And then the pre-sales were really, really strong for The Eighth Sister, and it was Gracie, my editor, who kind of got in touch with me, and we talked. And she said, he would be a really good series character. Do you have other ideas for him? And I didn't, but I said, give me a day. And really all it was going into The Eighth Sister and taking out one sentence and making the situation ambiguous as to whether or not a person had lived or died, so that I could then write the second book. And now I'm in the process of writing the third. I think the biggest thing with series is creating the world in which your character lives. It's not so much, I mean, you want your character to be real, but what I think readers really, really like is they like that world that your character lives in. Who are they married to? Do they have kids? Do they not have kids? Who are their neighbors? Who do they work with? Who are their partners on the police force? Who are their antagonists? And seeing those characters come back repeatedly in other novels, they begin to become part of the reader's world. It's why do readers get hooked on things like Game of Thrones? Because they get so invested in the world in which they're reading about. And so that's what I really think the key is always keeping that world fresh. So sometimes in the books I write with Tracy, Kins will be in the book a lot. Other times it'll be Faz, have something going on. At a time it was Dell. And so you just kind of keep rotating these characters in it and allow the reader to learn more and more about all the characters in there. And then they feel like they're part of the world.
So we have a question from Anne, who asks, how do you keep the plots and characters straight when you're working on multiple books? Because it sounds like you've got a lot of going on at once,
Yeah. Yeah. So, I think because of the practice of law, I was a pretty good multitasker as it was. I learned how to multitask.
Mhm.
You know, I have situations now, like today, I just started the third Charles Jenkins books, and I had written about the first 15 pages, and my intent was to sit down at the desk and continue. And I got the final developmental edits back on my literary novel coming out next April. So I had to shift gears, and I had to spend about 5 hours doing that. And then when I got done and I sent it back, what I did honestly is I went and hit a bucket of golf balls, just to kind of clear my mind. And then I came back, and before we went online, I spent a couple of hours writing the next scene so it would be fresh tomorrow morning when I get started. You know, as far as keeping it, what I will do is after I've written a certain number of pages, and there's really no specific number, but you know, after I've written 70 pages, what I will do at times is I will go back and create sort of an outline of what those 70 pages are. And that's sort of for me to be able to keep track of names I've used and places they've been, and if somebody's come into a story and when they came into the story on what page. And so I can kind of go back and follow that as I work my way through the manuscript. I'll go and I'll add to that outline as I'm kind of going through it. And really, it's a way for me to just sort of keep track, and so I don't have to sit there the whole time going, wait a minute, what did I name that character? And then I got to go back and look and look and look. And I think, you know, that's just wasting time. So,
Yeah.
so I will do that. I will keep kind of a running outline of that first draft.
Yeah.
So I have an idea.
Cool. Okay, so Barbara Tom asks, or she notes that some authors have subtly added topical political issues in recent books. Do you feel any interest or pressure to do that?
No. No, because you know it's sort of like writing about abortion or writing about the death penalty. You know, it's a situation where 50% of the people are going to disagree with you, and you know if you become transparent in it, you're going to lose 50% of a potential audience because they don't want to hear it. You know, they don't want to hear it, and for me, I think at times it can be a little egotistical. You know, I mean, if I'm throwing in a political viewpoint that's my viewpoint, why should I think that people are going to want to accept it, or that I have, you know, some knowledge that I just don't. My practice is that if people want to get the political stuff, they can get it in the newspaper. I mean, they can go turn on the news, and they can form their own opinions about Donald Trump and Joe Biden, and you know, are their opinions right? Well, they are to them. Whether they're right to the rest of us, I think, is something else. But to me, it's sort of like COVID. I mean, I think a lot of people want to escape from all that. It's gotten to be so antagonistic and sad in so many respects, what's happening right now, that I'm not sure people want to read about it anyway.
Okay. Does anybody else have any questions?
What's the name of your literary novel coming out next year?
We're debating that. I called it The World Played Chess. And it's based on that quote, the world played chess while I played checkers, which means, you know, a young man, 18 years of age, is sort of a coming of age novel. You don't know anything. You think you do, but then you realize you're not even playing the same game as the rest of the world, you know, and you really don't get it. And I thought it really fit the book well. My editors aren't, it's not grabbing them. So what I said most recently was, all right, well, give me a title that's going to knock my socks off, because that's what's going to take. I need a title that's going to knock my socks off. And I understand what they're saying. They're worried that, you know, people aren't going to understand the title, The World Played Chess. You know, I kind of thought it was provocative, which is really what you want in the title. You want people to go, "Ooh, what does that mean?" And then look at the book to find out what the title means. So right now it's The World Played Chess. What it is when it comes out next September, I'm not sure.
Okay, anyone else?
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Yes, thank you so much for being with us.
No, my pleasure. My pleasure.
And of course, we're all very excited about your new book, and the spotted owl season is heating up, of course, as the year rolls along. So good luck to you for
Thank you.
2021. Well, so I guess I'll go ahead and bring it to a close then. I would like to let everybody know that we will be back in November. On November 19th, we're going to have Robert C. Donnelly. He was actually our March guest who we had to postpone because of COVID, and he's going to be joining us by Zoom. He's the author of Dark Rose, Organized Crime and Corruption in Portland, which is a really fascinating book. I mean, I think, it's a scholarly book that reads like gripping, the most gripping history. It's just amazing for those of you who are familiar with Portland of the present. It was a very different world in the organized crime era that he writes about. So we're really looking forward to having him on November 19th. And then after the first of the year, we're going to have S.A. Cosby, who's and of course my
Top
brain
Wasteland.
Blacktop Wasteland is really lighting fires out there. It's an amazing book, and he's going to be interviewed by James D.F. Hanna, who's a Seamus award-winning writer in his own right. So and then we've got more to come after that. So we hope that you join us in November, and thank you so much for joining us tonight. And I'll leave the window open here for a little while as people start to filter out, but feel free to chat as you like, and we'll see you next time.
Thank you all. I'm gonna run and have dinner.
Very good. Very good.